It was one of those calm Sunday evenings when everything in the neighborhood seemed half asleep. The sky was fading into shades of gold and gray, and the air outside carried the smell of rain that never came. Inside her little white house on Maplewood Lane, Emma Hayes was finishing her chores. She had spent the afternoon tending her garden, trimming the roses that her late husband, Mark, had planted years ago. Those roses had become her quiet companions, reminders of a love she still felt but could no longer touch. Just as she placed the watering can back on the porch, a gentle knock came at her door. It wasn't loud, but it startled her all the same. Emma looked through the window and froze for a second. Standing outside was Daniel Miller, her neighbor from across the street. He was holding a small box wrapped in brown paper, the kind that looked old and fragile. Daniel was in his mid-30s, kind-eyed and always polite. They had spoken many times over the years, short greetings, small talk about the weather, the garden, or the mail that got mixed up. He was one of those people everyone liked instantly, but no one really knew deeply. Emma wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door. "Curious, Daniel," she said, surprised but smiling softly. "Everything all right?" He smiled back, though a bit nervously. "Hey, Emma. Sorry for showing up like this. I found something today, and I think it belongs to you." He held up the box. Emma frowned slightly. "Belongs to me?" "Yeah," he said, shifting his weight. "I was cleaning out my attic and found a few old boxes the previous owners must have left behind. Inside one of them, there was this photo. It looked like you, so I thought, well, maybe it's yours." She took the box carefully, her curiosity growing. "That's strange. I've never seen anything from that house before." "Yeah," Daniel said with a quiet chuckle. "I thought the same. But when I saw the photo, I knew it had to be you." Emma unwrapped the paper. Inside was a faded photograph, its edges worn and slightly curled. Her breath caught in her throat as soon as she saw it. It was a picture of her and Mark, standing right in their front yard, the same spot where she now stood every morning, missing him. In the photo, she was laughing, her head tilted toward Mark's shoulder. It must have been taken 10 years ago, maybe more. Her hands trembled. I thought this photo was gone," she whispered. "I haven't seen it since we moved here." Daniel's expression softened. "Then it really is yours." She looked up at him, her eyes glassy with emotion. "Thank you for bringing this, Daniel." "You didn't have to." He shrugged gently. "It felt right to. It just seemed important." She hesitated for a moment, then opened the door wider. "Would you like to come in for a minute? It's getting cold out." Daniel hesitated to like someone unsure if they were crossing a line, but finally nodded. "Sure, thanks." Inside, Emma's home was warm and filled with the scent of cinnamon candles. It was cozy, the kind of home that felt lived in and loved, even if it carried quiet sadness in its corners. She placed the photo on the coffee table, staring at it as though it could speak. Daniel sat on the edge of the sofa, still holding his jacket. "You know," he said softly, "when I found that box, there were a few other things in there too. Some old letters, postcards, random stuff. But that photo stood out." Emma nodded slowly. "This picture was taken the first summer we lived here. Mark had just built that white fence in the back. He loved working on little things like that." Her voice broke slightly. "He passed away 5 years ago." Daniel looked down, his voice gentle. "I know. I remember when the neighborhood brought you flowers. You were always so strong." She gave a faint, sad smile. "Strong, maybe, but not without cracks." For a moment, silence filled the room. Only the faint ticking of the clock and the soft hum of the refrigerator could be heard. The photo between them seemed to pull the air tighter, like it carried something that neither of them fully understood. Then Daniel spoke again, his tone careful. "There's something else about that photo." Emma looked up sharply. "Something else?" "Yeah," he said, reaching for it gently. "When I turned it over, there was writing on the back. I didn't read much, but it didn't look like something random." Her eyebrows knitted in surprise. "Writing?" He turned the photo over and handed it to her. On the back, faint, but still visible, were the words written in Mark's familiar handwriting. For the day we meet again, Mema's breath caught. The room felt suddenly smaller. He wrote this, she whispered. Mark wrote this. But how could it end up in your attic? Daniel's brow furrowed. That's what I've been wondering. I bought my house from a woman named Margaret Miller, my aunt. She lived there for decades, but she passed away before I moved in. Maybe she knew your husband somehow. Emma shook her head slowly, confusion spreading through her. No, I never met her, at least. I don't think I did. Daniel leaned forward slightly. There were more letters in that same box. Some of them mentioned people from this street. Maybe your husband and my aunt knew each other back then? Emma looked at him, trying to piece together a puzzle she didn't know existed. The idea that her late husband might have had some unseen connection to the house across the street to Daniel's family felt both strange and oddly comforting. I'm sorry if I'm making this sound strange, Daniel added quickly. I just thought you'd want to know. I can bring you the rest of the things I've found if you'd like. Yes, she said quietly. I'd like that very much. They sat there for a moment longer, neither speaking. Emma's eyes lingered on the handwriting on those simple words for the day we meet again. It sounded like a message meant for her, hidden in time. Waiting to be found. When Daniel stood to leave, Emma followed him to the door. Thank you again, she said sincerely. You didn't have to go out of your way for me. He smiled, that soft, hesitant smile she'd always noticed. It's no trouble. Sometimes life brings things to us for a reason. Emma nodded, though her heart was racing with quiet questions. Maybe it does. He gave her a polite nod, stepping back into the fading evening light. As she watched him walk across the street, Emma held the photograph close to her chest, the edges pressing into her palm. There was something mysterious about the timing, about how that photo had found its way back to her through the hands of a neighbor she barely knew. And as she stood there on her porch, the wind rustling the roses Mark had planted, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that something hidden in her past was slowly making its way to the surface. Again, something she was meant to discover, something that would change everything. Emma couldn't sleep that night. The photo Daniel had returned to her lay on the bedside table, lit softly by the glow of her lamp. She kept turning it over in her hands, reading the faded words again and again. For the day we meet again, M. The handwriting was definitely Mark's. She would have recognized it anywhere. But how had it ended up in Daniel's attic? That question wouldn't leave her mind. By morning, the sky was pale gray and quiet. Emma made herself a cup of coffee, though she barely drank it. She kept staring out the kitchen window toward Daniel's house across the street. It felt strange now, like it was connected to her somehow. Just before noon, there was another knock on her door. When she opened it, Daniel stood there again, holding a small pile of envelopes. I hope it's okay, he said, smiling a little. I brought the rest of what I found. Emma stepped aside. Of course, come in. He followed her into the living room. She noticed how natural it felt now, having him there. The silence between them didn't feel awkward anymore, just thoughtful. Daniel placed the stack of letters on the table, his expression careful. Some of these are addressed to a Margaret Miller, my aunt. But a few, well, you should see for yourself. Emma sat beside him and began to sort through the envelopes. Some were faded, yellowed with age, tied together with an old ribbon. She opened the first one, addressed to M. Miller. The handwriting inside was neat but unfamiliar. The letter began simply, "Thank you for helping me when the doctors couldn't. I'll never forget your kindness. My wife doesn't know everything yet, but I think one day she will." Her hands froze. "This is Mark's handwriting," she whispered. "But what does he mean? Helping him when the doctors couldn't?" Daniel leaned closer, reading over her shoulder. "My aunt was a nurse before she retired." Maybe he meant that. Emma sat back slowly. The letter didn't sound like a patient thanking a nurse. It sounded more personal, secret even. She looked through the rest. Some were from Margaret to Mark, others from Mark to her. Each one mentioned things like your courage, your quiet understanding. "And tell her when the time is right. Daniel frowned. Tell who? Emma swallowed hard. Me. He meant me. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft rustling of paper between their fingers. Emma's heart ached as she read the letters, not because of jealousy or anger, but because she realized how much of Mark's life she hadn't known. Daniel broke the silence gently. My aunt was a very private woman. She helped a lot of people in small, quiet ways. Maybe your husband was one of them. Maybe they stayed in touch. Emma nodded slowly. Maybe, but why hide the letters? Why write things like, for the day we meet again? Daniel looked thoughtful. Maybe he meant something more spiritual. Maybe he believed some things come full circle, that people meet again somehow. She looked down at her hands, tracing the edge of one letter. Mark always said that love didn't end when a person was gone, that it just changed form. Daniel's voice softened. Maybe that's what this is, something that found its way back to you. His words lingered in the air, gentle but powerful. Emma felt tears rise in her eyes, though she tried to hold them back. You know, she said quietly, Mark used to tell me stories about the people who helped him during his treatments. Maybe Margaret was one of them. Maybe he wanted me to find this one day to remember kindness doesn't stop, even after loss. Daniel nodded, watching her carefully. That sounds like something he'd want you to believe. They sat there for a while, reading through more letters. Each one seemed to reveal something small, yet meaningful about gratitude, hope, and second chances. And though none of them explained everything, they painted a picture of connection between two kind souls who had met during difficult times. After reading the last letter, Emma sighed and leaned back. It's strange, she said softly. I feel like Mark is trying to tell me something, but I don't know what. Daniel smiled faintly. Maybe you don't have to know right now. Maybe it's something that'll unfold naturally. Emma looked at him, noticing how calm and grounded he was. His presence brought her a quiet comfort she hadn't felt in years. He didn't try to fix her pain. He simply sat with it, letting it exist. That alone meant more than words could dot. As the afternoon light faded, Daniel stood up. I should get going, he said gently. You've got a lot to think about. She walked him to the door, feeling a strange hesitation she couldn't explain. Daniel, thank you, really, for bringing this to me. I don't know what I'd have done if you hadn't. He smiled softly. It's nothing. Honestly, I think your husband would have wanted someone to find it. She tilted her head, curious. Why do you say that? He paused, his eyes thoughtful. Because my aunt wrote something strange in one of her journals before she passed. I didn't think much of it until now. Emma felt her pulse quicken. What did she write? Daniel hesitated. She said, the promise he made will find its way back to her through someone she least expects. At the time, I didn't know what that meant. But now, he looked at her, his gaze steady. I think it's you, she meant. And maybe I'm the someone. Emma felt a chill rush down her spine. Not fear, but wonder. The timing, the photo, the letters, the message. It all connected in a way that didn't feel like coincidence. She managed a soft smile. That's incredible. Daniel nodded. It feels that way. For a moment, they just stood there in the doorway, caught between gratitude and something deeper that neither dared name. There was a spark in the air, quiet but undeniable, the kind that exists only when two people share something meaningful and unplanned. Before leaving, Daniel said quietly, if you ever want to go through the rest of the box together, I'd be glad to help. There might be more we haven't found yet. Emma nodded. Yes, I'd like that. He smiled one last time, then turned to walk down the steps. The late sunlight caught the edge of his hair, glowing faintly gold. Emma watched him go, her heart heavy yet strangely light. When she closed the door, she leaned against it, letting the silence fill the house again. But this time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt alive, as if the house itself was breathing, holding secrets long buried that were now slowly surfacing. She walked back to the table, picked up the letters, and held them to her chest. For years, she had lived with quiet sorrow, believing her story with Mark had ended. But now she wasn't so sure. Maybe some stories don't end. Maybe they just shift, finding new hands, new hearts, and new beginnings. And as she looked out the window toward Daniel's house across the street, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something had begun, something unexpected, gentle, and deeply connected to the love she thought she had lost forever. The following days passed in a blur of soft confusion and quiet reflection. Emma couldn't stop thinking about the letters or Daniel's words. Every time she tried to move on with her day, making tea, folding laundry, watering her roses, her mind drifted back to him and the mystery connecting their lives. She told herself it was just curiosity, but deep down, she knew it was something else. Daniel started stopping by more often. Sometimes he brought coffee, sometimes a stack of old papers he'd found in another box. They'd sit together on her porch or at the small table in her kitchen, talking about the past, the letters, and life itself. He was easy to talk to, calm, genuine, and kind in ways Emma hadn't felt around anyone since Mark. There was no rush in his words, no pity, just quiet understanding. One chilly afternoon, Daniel arrived carrying a weathered journal. "I think this was my aunt's," he said, placing it on the table. "But look what's written inside." Emma opened the cover. In faded ink were the words, "For Emma Hayes, when the time feels right." Her heart skipped a beat. How did she know my name? Daniel looked uneasy. "That's what I've been asking myself. I didn't even realize until now that my aunt and your husband knew each other this well." Emma began reading the entries. Margaret had written about meeting a man named Mark who was struggling through an illness, about and how he often spoke of his wife, his garden, and his belief that kindness could outlast grief. She described him as a man who carried hope even when he was in pain. Emma's eyes watered as she read. One passage aloud, he told me he feared leaving her alone. I told him life has a way of returning what we give, sometimes through people we least expect. She closed the book slowly. "She really said that?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah, and she told me that exact thing before she passed away." A soft silence fell between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was heavy with meaning. Emma looked at Daniel, really seeing him for the first time. The way he leaned forward slightly when he listened, the warmth in his eyes when she smiled, the care in how he spoke. She realized that he had quietly become a part of her life, filling spaces she hadn't known were still empty. "Emma," Daniel said gently, his voice hesitant, "can I tell you something that's been on my mind?" She nodded, though her heart started to race. He looked down for a moment, searching for words. "When I first found that box, I thought it was just coincidence. But the more I read those letters, the more I realized maybe it wasn't. My aunt used to tell me stories about people she'd helped, how sometimes she'd stay in touch with them long after they were gone. She believed in connections that went beyond time." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "Do you think Mark wanted you to find me?" Daniel met her gaze. "I think maybe he hoped someone would. Someone who could remind you that life still had more to give." Her throat tightened. "You're saying this was all meant to happen?" He smiled softly. "I don't know if I believe in fate, but I do believe in timing. And somehow I think this timing was right." Emma looked away, blinking back tears. "For years I've tried to be fine, to tell myself I was okay. But ever since you showed up with that photo, it's like something inside me woke up again." Daniel reached across the table, not touching her hand, but close enough that she felt the warmth of his presence. Maybe that's the message he left behind. Not just words on paper, but a reminder that love doesn't disappear. It changes shape, but it stays. Her voice trembled. "It's strange. I barely knew you before this. Now it feels like I've known you for years." Daniel's eyes softened. "That's exactly how I feel." For a moment, the world outside seemed to pause. No wind, no sound, only the soft hum of their shared breath. Emma didn't move, but her heart raced faster than it had in years. She could feel the pull of something new forming between them, something delicate yet undeniable. Breaking the silence, Daniel said quietly, "I need to tell you the full truth." Emma's stomach tightened. "The truth." He took a deep breath. I didn't tell you everything the first time I came over. My aunt didn't just leave that photo behind. Before she passed, she told me there was a woman across the street I might someday need to look after someone. She said had lost more than most people could imagine. She told me her name was Emma Hayes. Emma stared at him in shock. So, you knew who I was before we met? He nodded slowly. Yes, I moved into the house after she died. I told myself I'd just live a quiet life here. But then I saw you that first day standing in your garden, smiling at those roses, and it felt like I'd known you already. I didn't come to your door because I wanted to invade your life. I came because I found the box and knew I couldn't keep it from you. It wouldn't have felt right. Emma's eyes filled with emotion. So you came because of her. Because of my husband. Daniel hesitated. At first, yes. But now, I stay because of you. The room seemed to still around them. His words hung in the air, soft but full of meaning. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. It had been years since anyone had spoken to her with such quiet honesty. She didn't know what to say. Every part of her felt torn between loyalty to the past and the pull of something unexpected and real. But when she looked into Daniel's eyes, she saw no confusion there, only sincerity. He continued gently, I don't want to replace anyone. I just want to be here. You've carried so much alone, and you shouldn't have to anymore. Emma's lips parted slightly, her voice trembling. You don't know how much those words mean. Daniel gave a small, almost shy smile. Then I'm glad I said them. The moment felt fragile, like glass. One wrong word could shatter it. Yet somehow neither wanted to break it. They simply sat there, the unspoken connection between them stronger than anything they could explain. After a long pause, Emma finally said softly, Maybe this is what Mark meant in that note for the day we meet again. Maybe he didn't mean himself. Maybe he meant meeting someone who would remind me what love feels like. Daniel looked at her, his eyes warm. Maybe so. Outside, the evening sun painted the world in soft amber light. Through the window, the garden glowed, the roses swaying gently. As if nodding in quiet approval, Emma smiled faintly, her heart full but calm. For the first time in years, she didn't feel haunted by memories. She felt connected to her past, to her husband's kindness, and to this new chapter unfolding before her. And as Daniel stood to leave that evening, he paused at the door and said, If this is too much, I'll understand. But I just wanted to tell you the truth. Emma met his eyes, steady now. No, Daniel. I think it's exactly what I needed to hear. Smiled. The kind of smile that feels like the start of something beautiful. And walked out into the fading light. Emma closed the door behind him, leaning against it for a moment. Her heart was full, not with sadness, but with something else entirely. Hope something had changed that day. Not just between them, but inside her. The past no longer felt like a chain. It felt like a bridge leading her to something new. And as the evening settled over Maplewood Lane, Emma knew her story wasn't ending after all. It was only just beginning. Winter came softly that year, wrapping the little town of Maplewood in a quiet blanket of snow. The streets glistened under pale light, and every rooftop sparkled like crystal. Inside her cozy house, Emma Hayes watched the snowfall through her kitchen window. Her hands wrapped around a mug of warm tea. It had been weeks since Daniel's confession, weeks filled with change she hadn't expected but couldn't deny. Life had begun to feel alive again. The letters were now kept neatly in a small wooden box on her mantel. Beside the photograph Daniel had returned to her, the one with the words for the day we meet again. She no longer looked at it with tears in her eyes. Now she looked at it with peace. The message felt different. It no longer spoke of loss, but of connection. A reminder that love, in its truest form, doesn't vanish. It transforms. Daniel and Emma had grown close since that night. Their friendship had deepened naturally, like the slow blooming of a flower in spring. They still talked about Mark sometimes, but not with pain. Instead, Emma shared stories of their life together, and Daniel listened, really listened the way people do when they care. He never rushed her or tried to fill the silence. He just made space for her memories, her laughter, and the quiet moments in between. One snowy evening, Daniel came over with 2 cups of hot cocoa. "I figured you'd like something different tonight," he said, smiling as he handed her the mug. His cheeks were red from the cold, and snowflakes clung to his hair. Emma laughed softly. "You've been out in that weather. It's freezing." "I don't mind," he said, sitting down across from her. "It's peaceful out there." They sat by the fire, sipping their cocoa as the room filled with the soft crackle of burning wood. Outside, the snow fell steadily, and for a moment, everything felt perfect, still, warm, and safe. Daniel looked around the room, his eyes resting on the photo of Emma and Mark. "He really did love you," he said quietly. Emma nodded with a small smile. "Yes, he did, and I'll always love him. But, you know what I realized lately?" "What?" She turned toward the fire, her voice soft but steady. "That love doesn't end when someone's gone. It changes shape, but it keeps going. I think Mark wanted me to find peace again, maybe even love again, in a new way." Daniel didn't answer at first. He just looked at her, his heart heavy and full all at once. "Maybe he did," he said finally. "And maybe that's what those words meant on the photo for the day we meet again. Not about him returning, but about you finding your way back to love." Emma met his eyes and felt something inside her settle. She had spent years afraid to move forward, afraid it would mean forgetting. But Daniel had shown her that moving on didn't mean erasing the past. It meant carrying it with her gently, as she made space for something new. As weeks passed, Daniel became part of her everyday life. He helped her fix the leaky kitchen pipe, shoveled her driveway when it snowed, and joined her for morning walks through the neighborhood. They laughed more now, really laughed. The kind of laughter that fills the house and makes it feel alive again. The neighbors noticed too. "It's nice to see you smiling again, Emma," Mrs. Clark said one afternoon while walking her dog. Emma simply smiled and nodded, her heart light. One evening, Daniel came by carrying a small gift box. "I found this while sorting through my aunt's things again," he said. "I think it's meant for you." Emma looked surprised. "For me?" He nodded and handed it to her. Inside was a delicate silver locket, simple but elegant. When she opened it, she gasped. Inside, on one side, was a tiny photo of her and Mark. On the other side was a note written in Margaret's handwriting. "Some promises keep living even when we don't." Emma's eyes glistened. This is incredible." Daniel smiled gently. "I think she wanted you to have it. Maybe she knew it would bring you peace." Emma held the locket close to her chest. "She and Mark both gave me a gift I didn't know I needed." Daniel's voice was quiet. "What's that?" "A reminder that love doesn't end, it just changes who delivers it." They sat in silence for a moment, the warmth between them filling the room. Then Emma looked up, her tone light. "You know, Daniel, when I first met you, I thought you were just the kind neighbor with perfect timing." He laughed softly. "And now," she said, smiling, "I think you were part of a promise, one that started long before we met." That night, as Daniel left, snow began to fall again, soft, slow, and peaceful. Emma stood at the window watching him walk across the street, the light from the lamppost casting a golden glow around him. Something about the sight made her chest ache, but not with sadness. It was gratitude, deep, warm gratitude for everything that had led to this moment. Days turned into weeks, and by early spring the snow melted away. The roses in her garden began to bloom again, red and bright, just like the year Mark planted them. Emma spent her mornings outside trimming them, while Daniel painted his porch across the street. Sometimes they'd wave at each other, smiling like old friends who had weathered something together, something beautiful. One Sunday morning, Daniel crossed the street carrying a picnic basket. "How about breakfast in the garden?" he asked cheerfully. Emma laughed. "I was just about to make pancakes, but I suppose that works too." They sat among the blooming roses, eating and talking about everything: books, movies, the smell of rain, the way time felt slower on Sundays. It wasn't a romance built on sparks or rushes, It was quiet, steady, and comforting, the kind of love that felt earned through kindness and patience. At one point, Daniel looked at her and said softly, "You've changed since the first day I came here." Emma tilted her head. "How so?" "You seem lighter, happier." She smiled, looking around her garden. "Maybe I am. Maybe I finally learned that happiness doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means letting it rest peacefully." Daniel nodded. "I'm glad." As the sun rose higher, Emma looked toward her mantel through the window, where two photos now stood side by side. One of her and Mark from years ago, and one of her and Daniel taken just last week, smiling under the same roses. It felt symbolic to chapters of the same story connected by time, loss, and love. When Daniel reached out to hand her a flower, their fingers brushed lightly. It was a small touch, but it carried more meaning than words ever could. Emma met his gaze, and for the first time she didn't feel torn between the past and the present. She felt whole. "Thank you, Daniel," she said softly. "For everything." Smiled, eyes warm. "You don't need to thank me, Emma. I think we were both just where we were meant to be." And as the morning sunlight bathed the garden, Emma realized the truth she had been waiting to understand all along. The promise Mark had left behind wasn't just about memories. It was about hope, about finding new ways to love and be loved in that peaceful garden, surrounded by roses, laughter, and quiet understanding. The promise was reborn not through words, but through the gentle rhythm of two hearts finding their way home again.